welcome to you, our WOWtv viewers. My name is Sarah Odwa Magibi, and we are busy with our election series 2016. As of course you know that in South Africa, we are preparing for our municipal or local government elections, which are going to take place officially on the 3rd of August in the year 2016. With me in studio is a wonderful lady from the Democratic Alliance. Her name is Miss Refilwe Nzekhe. Warm welcome to you, Miss Nzekhe, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on, and good day to your viewers.
Thank you. Well, I mean, we are going to spend some time just deliberating and being in conversation with yourself and our viewers at home as we prepare. Obviously, I'm sure that the 2016 elections is probably one of the groundbreaking elections for any political party, for that matter, in the background of all so much that is happening in South Africa. Before we just go into that in detail, can you perhaps just tell us a bit about the Democratic Alliance as a party?
It's actually quite difficult to say. Where do you want me to start? Look, DA's been in existence since the 50s. Obviously, we've rebranded. Our pioneers are people like the great Helen Suzman, who in 1959 was literally the sole fighter of apartheid in the government. And during that time, she even went to the point of visiting the great Nelson Mandela in prison. But she fought, she was like a lone ranger. She fought against racism, apartheid during that time. It was known as the PDP then. And then we've grown over the years. In the 80s, 90s, we had 7 members of parliament. Today, we've evolved into having 101 members of parliament. So we're a growing organization. And we're a party that is really based on non-racialism. We're based very much on free market economy and liberalism. And we call ourselves a party that is a party for all. And when we mean a party for all, we don't discriminate against everybody. We really believe South Africa is at a space where any South African is welcome in the Democratic Alliance. We don't look at color. We actually believe instead of looking at people by the tone of their skin color, you must look at their character. And that's what the party is about. And we want to grow the economy. We believe we've got a great South Africa, and it's time South Africa actually took its place, because we believe it can be one of the greatest nations in this world. It is the hub of the African economy, and it needs to do that.
I want to find out from you, I mean, 22 years into democracy, and even as you've given us the background of where you started with the likes of Helen Suzman under the banner of apartheid, 22 years into a democratic state as South Africa, is DA still relevant today?
I cannot imagine it being more relevant than it is today. If you look at the words of the great Nelson Mandela when he said, "I want a non-racial South Africa, I want a South Africa for all, let's talk to reconciliation." In fact, internally, we actually have something called R2D2, which is redress, reconciliation, delivery, and diversity. And that's what the DA is about. It's about, we honor our past, and we want to make sure that we take our place in the future and move forward, uniting South Africans as we go. So you cannot be more relevant than that today, because you actually need a party that is actually going to bring South Africans together instead of splitting them apart.
What do you think, I'll just want us to elaborate on that point about unity. Basically, what do you think has been the challenge that has made it difficult for the nation to unite post the apartheid government, in terms of where we are at, and what would it take, even if it's just one characteristic that you think would take to actually bring the unity together?
Corruption.
What about corruption?
I think South Africa has been plagued with corruption. If you look at even the development of our constitution, when it was written around 1996, it was written with Nelson Mandela at the helm and the captain of the South African ship. And today, when you look at the violation of the Constitution, you can see that this is actually robbing South Africans of the ability to actually prosper, and I mean emotionally and financially. So people tend to not realize that corruption and lack of service leads to lack of service delivery, which in turn then denies South Africans dignity. Because today we've got more people than ever on grants, and youth particularly. And these are people who should actually be working or be encouraged to become entrepreneurs, not just being dependent on a 350 grant when you know you are able-bodied.
When we're talking about corruption, I think is a sensitive issue for all of us as South Africans. But what is your stance as the Democratic Alliance? I mean, so many political parties talk about the same beast. But what is your stance, even as we go towards the 2016 elections, in combating corruption in government?
Look, any government, if it really wants to prosper, you need to have a zero tolerance approach to corruption. And when I look at corruption, I'm talking about tenders being awarded where people are, without people knowing what the criteria was, where it wasn't an openly publicized tender, where tenders are created because somebody had a discussion with somebody on the golf course, and then suddenly there's a tender for something. That's one. Then the other one is actually people that are actually embezzling money. I mean, a typical example is Nkandla, which we've been fighting in Parliament even from the days of Lindiwe Mazibuko as our parliamentary leader, from as far back as 2010, 2011, to say the president has two presidential homes in Pretoria and another one in Cape Town. And now you go and actually renovate, but with exorbitantly inflated prices, a private homestead to the tune of 264 million. That's embezzlement. And then you even take it further and say, when we said the president is stealing, he took us to court. But the court ruled in the favor of the DA to say, yes, President Jacob Zuma actually stole money from South Africans. And then you look at his stance with how he handled that case from 2010 to today. He first denied knowing anything. Then he said it was built with his family money. And it took going to court for him to actually come out and say, I'm sorry, I did take money from South Africans. So if you look at it, morality even in that space, he lied to South Africans and said, I didn't know, I used my family money. And then it comes out it's actually money from public works, which means South Africans were denied service delivery. If you look at 264 and what you could have done, you could have possibly in one area built a clinic and a school, which are much needed services for South Africans today.
Okay, I hear that, but I want us to get to the point to say, now you've got viewers who are listening and you have an opportunity to say, okay, so what steps that Democratic Alliance would take to combat such kinds of things? Obviously, you've given us examples, which are live examples of what we know. But what steps would the DA take to ensure or to give comfort even to those potential voters of yours who are listening to say, this now would give me comfort to say that the Democratic Alliance has a plan in place to combat such issues if you would come into government?
It's actually not even a plan. I think let's go back to morality, because it's important for people to contextualize combating corruption and morality. First of all, if you're going to have a tender, let's say it's a tender to do roads. We believe in what we call an open opportunity society for all. And the reason I'm going to particularly touch on open, because that talks to corruption. If you've got a tender, you advertise it with the criteria of what you're looking for. The second thing that we do, and we do it where we govern, is when the tender is adjudicated, you actually have media houses and all the people tendering in the same room. You go through the criteria, what is required, and the adjudication is done publicly. And then when you do the awarding is done publicly. Those who don't qualify also get to understand why they didn't qualify, so that tomorrow if they come back to tender for something else, they know what their shortcomings are and can work on improving themselves. So that's one of the key things that needs to happen in terms of eradicating corruption.
Can I come into that play and maybe get into it and say, but somebody else could argue and say, for example, if you look at the MFMA, PFMA, somebody can argue and say, but on the basis of what that act stipulates, those things supposedly are in place, okay? Because now you've just given what you've defined as an open system, and we're using this as an example. But then why are they not happening? Because then, because I'm just thinking somebody who might be sitting and listening to say, okay, I hear that you are saying that there must be an open system, these things must be advertised, or when tenders are opened, people must be present, so these are they are supposedly meant to be there by now based on those two acts. But what is it that would be different, that would be done from what by law is given but is not being enacted?
The PFMA doesn't advocate for openness necessarily. It advocates for maintaining the criteria and ensuring that your adjudication is done correctly.
No, it doesn't. Okay, but
look at the detail of the PFMA. It's one of my acts that I actually read when I go to bed, having been a councillor previously. But literally, you have to actually, as a government, say to yourself, how am I going to ensure that I am consistently complying with, let's look at PFMA because that talks to Public Funds Management Act. And how do you comply to making sure that public funds are managed publicly, which is the openness that people are failing to comply with currently.
Okay, I don't want to go into make it to be about a supply chain issue, but I was just playing it so that we can start
I'm talking about the openness of what you're talking about. Once you go into saying complying, you need to look at the public part. I mean, we can take it even to SABC and what we mean by public broadcaster versus state broadcaster. The minute you're talking about curbing corruption, your openness needs to happen. You need to have a zero tolerance. That's why some of the things we talk about is even a simple thing. If you are a public official or you are an employee in a municipality, you should not even go into business with that municipality.
Yeah, but you said that's the point I was bringing forward to say one can argue and say these acts make a way of a policy framework to be able to say this is the process that should be taken when I go through a tender. Yet in the midst of all of those safeguards, you still have this kind of corruption and embezzlement. So what is it that you do differently as the Democratic Alliance in making sure that maybe there is a policing over the policies that are in place or the acts that are in place? Because the acts do put that. I mean, as we're talking about the PFMA, and like I said, I don't want us, it would be nice to have that conversation, because I think one of the biggest issues of corruption is tenders, is in the area of procurement and supply chain.
Correct.
Yet the acts themselves have safeguards in place that supposedly are supposed to have an open system, yet it doesn't happen like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you there, because one, you start with the fact that we've actually got one of the best constitutions in the country, and following from that, we've got very good acts that talk to what needs to happen. But it's the onus is on the ruling party wherever they are governing. And I mean, I'm going to take Cape Town where we govern, or Midvaal, and say, if you're not complying yourself as a political party, that's a problem. And that's where the problem needs to be dealt with. That's why with us, if you even take something like Cape Town, we have a municipal manager right now who has been suspended, and we've actually put in criminal charges against the municipal manager because we found out that he's actually sent a tender via a family member. So you need to have a zero tolerance approach to those kind of things. So if other political parties that are in government, I'm going to be very clear here and say, if ANC doesn't do that, it's not helping South Africa. Because as a party, as soon as you hold a position and manage a municipality or a legislature or parliament, you need to implement a zero tolerance to any form of corruption.
Yeah, all right. Let's come back to the 2016 manifesto. And the issues that characterize you as Democratic Alliance as we're going. If you can just share briefly on the manifesto, and maybe you can just highlight, I'll leave it open to say, what are the things that you are basically laying out there to potential voters to say for them, this is what we're going to stand for, this is what we are standing for as a Democratic Alliance in this local government elections.
We're very clear. Ours is very much a back to basics system manifesto. We've talked about corruption. Our first thing is cut corruption, have service delivery, and when you've then have service delivery, ensure that you create an environment that is conducive for jobs or entrepreneurship. That's it. Our manifesto is that basic. Obviously, there's details of examples where we govern how we've implemented those.
Yeah. But is it really government's responsibility to create jobs? Let's just talk about that.
I talked about service delivery.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you what I like to call layman's terms in terms of how you create jobs. And I like that you're asking that question. Government has a very minute role in terms of creating jobs, things like EPWPs and that. But the real job of a government is to provide service delivery and then build investor confidence, because investors, people tend to think you're talking about investments. It's actually getting big businesses to trust you as a government and then come into your municipality. And when they do that, they come and create the jobs. So you're supposed to set the platform or the environment that the investors or big businesses get attracted to in order to come and bring the jobs.
I'll ask you a question that was not premeditated, but it's just come to mind. Perhaps it would be interesting to get your point of view. I mean, I don't think it's a secret that one of the challenges that we have is passive citizenship within the nation of South Africa on its own. And we've just spoken now about job creation, and you've just laid out the environment that would be conducive. But I'm just thinking that, is there any, well, it might not be a stance that you have thought before, but it's just a question that's coming up to me that I would like us to talk about it. Is there anything that could be done, or maybe even as a political party, in assisting the citizens to get out of that space of having a sense of entitlement, having a feeling that government should do all these things for us while we are not playing any role in actually coming and becoming a partnership between what government provides and what we as citizens are supposed to, because there is a lot of passivity amongst South African citizens. I will focus on that.
I think the challenge of what happened with ANC coming into government and trying to redress the apartheid legacy is the RDP, the grants. It's a very controversial subject because people take it painfully, but it's actually created, you give me an RDP house and then I get a grant and I don't really have to work because I'm getting everything for free. And then because you're not working, you get free water, free electricity, etc., etc. That's actually sort of destroyed people's ability to say, I want to do for myself. One of the things that I think the Western Cape government was the first to say, we need to acknowledge that there's limited resources and the demand exceeds the supply, especially on RGP houses. What we are now starting to say is, rather encourage people to build their own houses. So we know there's pride in owning land, and it talks to part of our land redistribution. Instead of giving a person an RDP, especially somebody who's youth, physically able, give somebody a serviced stand. So that person, for example, when we talk about a service stand, it's land, you've got access to sewage, to water, to electricity, and possibly the roads are already mapped out. And you get your title deeds for that land. Now you get a job, and then you build what you actually want. So that is how I'd actually answer your question, to say, because we created a situation where even youth were getting an RDP house and then a grant of 350, which is not even enough actually to raise a child. I've got 3 kids. So how do you even, if I think of Pampers and Nan and milk and whatever and clothes, I still need more to even get to the basics of what a baby needs, you know. In fact, we need to be rather doing a very simplified thing where you say service delivery is the key to actually attracting businesses or creating entrepreneurship. If you listen to what Musi always says is, in fact, we should be pushing to create 1 million entrepreneurs in South Africa, because 1 million entrepreneurs are people who create jobs for other people. So, very simplified. You first need to make sure your service delivery is done, which is your basics. Make sure you've got proper roads. And I'm going to use Midvaal as a typical example. Have proper roads, have proper sanitation, have proper water flowing, have proper electricity. And obviously things like your municipal bill must make sense. If you're paying 1,000 this month, it can't suddenly be 20,000. And then your municipal people must go out and say, Mr. Pick and Pay, here's an environment that is right. Can you come and build a business in our municipality? And typically, if you look at what happened with Midval then, when they were constructing the warehouse, they employed 800 people. When the warehouse was completed, they then employed 3,000 people. That's the environment that we want, where you created an environment where Mr. Pick n Pay goes, okay, the water is stable, electricity is stable, sanitation is stable because people need to go somewhere. The roads are good, so my trucks can come into the warehouse, pick up stuff and deliver it to the various stores. And now they've employed 3,000 people in a very tiny municipality of just over 100,000 people. And then from there, you need to take it further. If you look at what we've been talking about, remember 2012, we had the Kosatu March where we were saying, we want to promote the youth wage subsidy, which actually says incentivize businesses to take on graduates or matriculants so that they can get experience. Because if you know the South African economy, somebody's going to say you need experience, but experience needs, you need
opportunity.
Exactly. So you can't get a job without an experience, but you can't get experience without a job. So incentivize the private sector to take on interns so that they can get the necessary experience. From then on, that's what the youth wage subsidy was talking about. And that becomes a rebate for the private sector. And then they take on these interns, and then they're like a 2-year internship. Then they're more employable. Taking it further, we also say, have something called an opportunity voucher. Instead of having cooperatives, and typically those are like in townships, start saying, I'm going to give an opportunity voucher. Identify talented people and say, okay, we can see this guy is good with his hands. And we know we need artisans in South Africa. If you take the job mail today, look at the scope of jobs. A lot of it is artisans. They need boiler makers, they need plumbers, they need welders. Encourage them to go to school and become artisans. And some of them will say, I want to start my own plumbing company. And an opportunity voucher is basically almost like a seed capital to say, okay, if you're a plumber, what kind of equipment do you need? And this person doesn't have something to give us a surety back. So it's a voucher to say, go and start your business on 2,000 Rand, because you don't need 1,000,000 Rand to be a plumber. Maybe you need just a couple of things that cost maybe 2,000 Rand to get started. Get that money and start your business. And that's how you're slowly starting to eradicate unemployment in South Africa. And if you look at the stats that have come out from Tatel Hutla, who's a statistician general, if you look at the first quarter of 2016, where Joburg and Tshwane and Ekurhuleni lost almost 160,000 jobs, Cape Town, through private and public partnership, was able to create 4,000 jobs, even in this economic challenge that we are sitting with. Private-public partnerships, where you actually working with the private sector and saying, we've got trust with our private partners, and they know the city of Cape Town will give them the necessary services, so they invest. And by investing, they attract people that will work for them.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just thinking now, I know that you lay down your 3 key points for your manifesto.
Very simple: corruption, service delivery, and jobs.
And job opportunities. Where is your stand on the issue? And I'm not saying anything about the manifesto, but I just want to find out, do you think is there any relation to education as it relates to the issues of job opportunity?
Of course.
Just maybe you can just share a bit about that in terms of your stance or your approach where education is concerned.
I think I'm going to share that, but I need to highlight that you must remember that education is a provincial and a national competency. However, we cannot ignore it. The reality is you need to fix your education in terms of the quality of education, and then from then on look at what goes into jobs. Even if you look at education today, it cannot be right in South Africa today to say 30% is a pass rate. I normally say to my son, who's about 12, if you went to a doctor and the doctor got 30%, would you allow him to operate on you? And my son would be like, no, Mom, he only knows 30% of my body. And that's actually a simplified version of how to realize that you cannot drop the pass mark. You need to work on the quality of education. And if you look at what the DA does, we're actually starting to say, let's have teachers tested at different levels to determine their competencies. And if they're struggling, make sure you give them the necessary training to bring them up to speed. We know there's a lot of teachers in the system that are not competent. And the challenge that South Africa is dealing with now is the unions. And if you also look at the teachers, if you have teachers that are performance assessed, we would have a lower teacher absenteeism, because that's another thing that is impacting on education. If you go, especially in township schools, because we must be honest and look at the facts, there's such a high teacher absenteeism. And then you look at the quality of those teachers. So if you look at one of our schools in Khayelitsha, which last year, when we looked at Cape Town being the best performing province in terms of matric results, it was that school was in the top 10. And what happened there was literally, they said, every quarter, the principals and the teachers go through performance assessment. And performance assessment includes your ability to stand in front of the class and teach, the quality of your learners and where they are. And remember, we were saying you need to test your students at grade 3 and grade 6 and so on, even right up to grade 11, so that you make sure that your foundation phases all the way right to grade 12 are competent. Start pushing maths and science subjects, which have been neglected terribly over the past 22 years. And then critical is also to say, look at the social aspect of children. The reason we looked at a school in Khayelitsha was to say, education in Khayelitsha must be as good as education in Rondebosch. Children shouldn't have to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go to a school in Rondebosch. The education should be right for them where they are. So now what you're seeing happening in Cape Town is the public schools are actually competing with the public schools. In fact, the queue or the waiting list for public schools is higher than in the private sector now because of what they're actually doing. So if you don't address your education at primary and secondary school, you are doing a disfavor to your children who are then going into tertiary, non-varsity ready. And then you're suddenly introducing this gap year that is in varsity, which is actually a revision of matric work to try and get them varsity ready.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm going to close our session as we go to a break on maybe a slightly controversial question that I'm going to ask now. Because I think, as we had indicated, that the majority of our listenership is a Christian community,
yes,
church-based. So, does DA have a space for the church? Yeah.
I'm a Christian. I'm a born-again Christian, and I love my Lord and Jesus. And I have found my space inside the DA because we believe in a party that says we're a party for all. You're allowed to have your own beliefs. You're allowed to have your own culture. And nobody should fight and discriminate against you because you're different. In fact, when you look at that R2D2, the other thing we were talking about is diversity. We can actually learn from each other's differences instead of stepping on each other's differences. I've actually, for example, one of my counselors that I work very closely with is an Afrikaans man. They now call us twins. We've actually found that if you look at a Mosotho, which I am, a typical Mosotho man and a typical Afrikaans man, they are so similar. And yet, because we have fear of engagement, I call it like a fear of the unknown. Because we don't engage each other, we build this wall called fear between us. And if you look at that, if you take your typical Christian premises, we're created in God's image. So why are we even judging each other?
Yeah. So that coming back to that, I know that you've made the stance for you individually. I don't know if you're speaking about the democratic.
I'm talking about me as the Christian, and then
yes.
say within the DA.
Yes.
We say, that's what we say. We're actually better together, and look at diversity. Diversity is actually talking to let people be different, but tolerance is an absolute premise of being in an environment where people are different. Even if you take up things like freedom of speech, it says, I'm going to die defending your right to speak, even if what you say is not what I believe in.
Well, our time is up, so we're going to go on a short break, and of course we will continue with our discussion.